Firstly, welcome and thanks for joining us on this Thursday evening and either delaying your evening meal or rushing through your evening meal to join us. I'm Claire Ponsford, a co-founder and owner of Wavelength International. We're a medical recruitment business, been in the GP space for over 25 years now, and just really passionate about helping private practice owners grow their businesses and be successful. The timing of this webinar was quite key for us, and I hope you've all managed to get some rest and relaxation over the Christmas New Year period and recharge the batteries. And I think a new calendar year is typically a time to take stock of both your personal and professional situation and think about what you want to achieve in the next 12 months and beyond. So today we brought together a panel of experts who will share their knowledge on what they believe are some of the key things you should focus on for the next 12 months. And we have three New Year's resolutions where we'll be discussing from a financial, legal and people perspective what's important to you from both a personal financial well-being perspective and also the well-being of your practice. So let me make the intros. Firstly, Ben Ryan. Ben is a partner in the commercial and corporate law practice at Avant Law. Ben works primarily on commercial structuring, dispute resolution, and intellectual property matters. Ben is a trusted advisor to the medical industry and regularly presents on commercial issues faced in private practice. So Ben, welcome and thank you. Next, we have Paul Copeland. Paul is a partner, business advisory with William Buck, based in Queensland, but has a national role as director of the health division. Paul has extensive knowledge in relation to medical and dental industries, covering all areas of general and specialist practices, assisting them with their accounting, tax, and business advisory requirements. And last but not least, we have Jane Stanky. Jane is based in the UK, so has got up super early for us this morning. So thank you, Jane. Jane's worked at Wavelength for over 16 years. She manages long-term and permanent GP roles across ACT, New South Wales, Queensland, WA, and provides practices and her doctors in Australia, New Zealand, and around the world with efficient and personalised service. So in terms of the format of today, we're having a bit of an informal panel discussion rather than bombarding you with a large number of content-heavy slides. And we will provide you with the contact details of all of our speakers at the end. So if you do want to reach out to any of them, you can have a confidential discussion about your personal circumstances. And this disclaimer here is really just to say that what you hear today doesn't necessarily constitute legal advice, accounting or other professional advice. It really is important that you speak directly to these experts about your individual circumstances. At the end of the panel discussion, we'll also have a Q&A session, and there is a Q&A button on your Teams window, which allows you to add questions as and when you think about them. So we'd encourage you to utilise that as we go through. So let's get started with our New Year's resolutions. First one, personal wealth review. Paul, would you like to give us your thoughts on this?
Thanks, Claire. Good evening to those online and hello to those that are watching later on. I think this is all being recorded and will go out to all those attendees that registered. As Claire said, I'm a partner at William Buck Accountants. We are based throughout Australia and we specialise heavily in the health industry. The idea of the personal wealth review is really using a New Year's resolution to prompt you to have a look at your own personal circumstances, look at your investments and think, am I on track for where I want to be in retirement? I speak to doctors all the time and the given is that I want to have tax minimisation, and a lot of investment decisions are made on the basis of minimising tax, but that's not always the best way to go about creating wealth and positioning yourself for the future, where you want to replace the income you're earning as a doctor with income that's going to come from passive investments. And so we have these conversations with our doctors about, and hopefully we don't leave it too late, to have this reset and refigure, reconsideration of where you're going financially. Buying 3 houses and paying them off and hoping to live off the rent in retirement isn't a strategy. It's about going through and understanding why we might put this off, and some of the ideas about this resolution was to say, look, let's just get in there and get it done now while we're getting into the new year. We find that a lot of doctors will put this off, and sometimes they've had a bad experience with a financial advisor. It is actually reasonably common, but it's about getting back on the horse and saying, look, I had a bad experience, but not everyone is bad. Let's have a chat to somebody else. Being busy, we're all busy professionals, and sometimes we hide behind being too busy and not doing this because we don't really want to do it. But I think it is really critical for medical professionals to make sure that they are thinking about this and positioning themselves well for the future. It's about then talking about having a succession strategy. It's about talking about having your wills in place. Now, the succession strategy doesn't mean that you stop work or you're thinking about retirement. It's about how can I position myself for that. And a will, it's not a death document, or it's not meant to be morbid. It's about making sure that your wealth and your wishes are there to protect your family if something were to happen to you. With that, I'll probably hand over to Ben if he's got any comments on that sort of thing as well.
Thanks, Paul. I think, yeah, certainly a lot of the time, this time of year in particular, a lot of the people we talk to, practices, practice managers, owners, and otherwise, really kind of use it as the opportunity to get on top of all of the practice issues that have been burning and bubbling away. But I think it's important that we also take the time to look at your own individual, personal circumstances and what you're doing, and take advantage of that time as much as possible. And as Paul says, it's a really great opportunity to use these documents as the assets that they are and not see it as this big burden that we all put off on the back foot because no one likes talking about death, understandably. And ultimately, that's what succession planning is to a large extent, is what's going to happen when you're no longer there to either run the practice or to look after the family. So try and take the time to look at it and make sure that it actually works. A lot of the time, I'm guilty of it myself. You look at your wills and your powers of attorney, and you either don't have them because you go, oh, I don't really need that. And then suddenly you're married and you potentially have children and various other things, and you go, oh, okay, well, actually, I probably now need to actually turn my mind to this because there's a business over here now as well. How's that business going to happen? What's going to happen here? All the time we see practices where the owners may pass away. There might be a husband and wife duo. There might be just one partner that's in the actual business. A practice recently where wife passed away. She was the owner of the practice, ultimately ran it. There wasn't really any succession plan in place for what happens if anyone did pass. And the husband didn't work in health at all, had no idea what to do. And so it was a mad scramble to try and figure out, can we try and do something with the other doctors in the practice and get them to take it over? But then also, where's everything actually up to? So as Paul's kind of alluding to, it's not necessarily just a case of have the review yourself. Make sure you sit down with your advisors and make sure that everyone knows, not only your advisors, but also the immediate people in your life, that like practice managers and partners, that know where everything actually is and what the plan is when these events do occur, because it can be a massive, not only financial burden for them, but emotional burden to try and figure it all out. So make sure you take the time to plan it all, because people ultimately are the backbone of the business and backbone of your life. And if you don't have the right people in place within the practice in particular, then your personal life's going to really struggle when these events do occur. And when it does come time to actually plan for retiring and who's going to take over or who's going to continue running. And that's probably as good a segue as I can do to Jane on this topic.
I was just going to say, Ben, sorry, before Jane jumps in, I think succession planning is key here, isn't it? Because I think if you put all of the effort into building your own practice, but you are perhaps a solo practitioner, or you maybe only have a couple of doctors, then thinking about what happens when you are no longer able to work, and how you derive value from what you've built is really key. And that's where, having the right people around you, from an advisory perspective, but also having the right people around you in your clinic and understanding what your plan is for growth and for replacing yourself almost,
Yeah, no,
you know,
definitely.
is really important. Yeah. Jane, so from a people perspective, what have you seen as typical issues perhaps that clinic owners have in terms of ensuring they're creating value in their businesses by having the right people around them?
Look, you probably saw me squirming in my seat when when Ben and Paul were talking, because I think I'm, you know, very much personally affected by this, because I've been kicking this can down the road for a couple of years now, and I think I really need to sit down and get a will sorted. You know, it doesn't even necessarily mean you're thinking about your personal demise, but I think it's just having, you know, your housekeeping in order, and I really need to get on that. But from a practice perspective, and obviously I'm coming here from more of a talent management, talent acquisition, and talent retention kind of perspective, I have seen scenarios where, you know, maybe a GP practice owner sadly passed away completely unexpected, and you know, his wife had to jump in and take over, and she had no medical background at all. Luckily, they were very well set up and were very well, you know, organized. She knew where everything was, she knew how to take over, and it actually worked really, really well. It's a wonderful practice. We've got lovely doctors working there, really wonderful feedback, but it really goes back down to the fact that she knew what to do. They had discussed it, and they had a plan, even though it was maybe not, you know, a plan that they had immediately, because it was very unexpected and sad. But luckily, they had that discussion at some point or another. So I think it's so important, you know, when you have a team, a practice, that there is some sort of discussion at some point about what happens if. But equally, if it's just about planning, you know, you might not want to be, you know, a practice owner forever. You know, you might want to take that break and live by the beach and tend to your garden. So having, you know, other people in place, having you know, a plan of what you want to do with your practice. Do you want to sell your practice? Do you want to keep it in the family? Is there someone in your practice already that might be keen to take over? And then it's a discussion around maybe how to nurture that talent, how to get them involved in the practice. What are the timelines maybe for your you know, retirement, and how can you start phasing out and phasing the new person in? So those are all conversations that are worth having, and you know, and maybe getting over that personal threshold of going, oh, very morbid conversation, but it's just having the conversation, and you know, everyone has peace of mind is something that I would definitely recommend, because it can affect so many people. It's not just yourself, it's all your staff, but it's also the patients at the practice that can be affected. So it really has a knock-on effect when, you know, someone departs a clinic, planned or unplanned. So having those conversations is definitely something I would strongly recommend.
Yeah, I think as well, like having that practice manual in place, not only for, you know, your privacy, compliance, and accreditation or whatever it may be, but also including in that manual who are the key IT providers, who's the accountant for the practice, who's the lawyer for the practice, all those key contacts, so that if someone ever does have that unforeseen exit from the business, a few people at the very least know where to look and where to turn and go, okay, well, crisis event has occurred. We're probably not going to have a set procedure for what happens when the main practice manager or practice owner passes or ceases to work in the business, but who can we turn to try and help us through this process, and what should the general policy actually be to lead us through it? It's a very simple thing to have in place that's not overly tedious as well.
We've done a lot in the space, and a lot of questions always with people, clients of ours, doctors that are going through and thinking about once they get to, you know, my age, where they're early 50s, and saying, well, retirement, I want to be sooner rather than later. And if you want to bring it forward or you want to push it out, that's entirely up to you. But you want to position yourself so that if you want to stop working, that your lifestyle can be maintained. And a lot of people don't know how much they need. And the big question comes through, and you see it online. People ask you, wealth agencies will say, look, how much do you need in retirement? There isn't a one size fits all answer to this. It's about going through and saying, what does retirement look like to you? You can have one person that says, I'm happy to sit on my veranda in my house in the suburbs and just rock on the chair all day and just watch the people walk past. And you get the other person that says, I want to cruise the world on the Queen Mary and have all my expensive clothes and so on. They're obviously going to need different amounts of money. I always ask my clients to start the discussion with the family and say, well, what does the retirement look like? How often we want to travel overseas? What do we want to do in retirement? Work out what it's going to cost you, and then try and work out how much you need to be able to pay for it all. And sometimes that can be quite jarring to say, well, if I lose my income as a doctor, I can't pay for anything. And so you've then got to position yourself well to make sure your assets are protected and you can fund retirement coming through. I'm focusing on the personal side of things as opposed to the business side of things, guys.
No, that's all, that's all well and good, and it was about us bringing that personal piece into it. So yeah, that's great. Thank you. So perhaps we can move on to our next resolution now, which is about reviewing the practice foundations, and I think there's a lot of practice owners that perhaps go through quite a rigorous process when they're initially setting up their clinic, and they receive advice from particular experts at that time. But it's not about thinking that you can set and forget, because legislation changes, compliance changes, opportunities change. So I guess this really is about saying at any point it is worth sitting down and having that really solid review of your clinic and how it's been set up. So Ben, did you want to just talk to some of the points here?
Yeah, of course. I think probably resolution 1 and resolution 2, I think necessarily should go hand in hand for every single practice owner or aspiring practice owner, because every single thing that you change within your practice, you want to make sure that it doesn't affect your personal life and your personal wealth plans as well. So make sure that you do have sort of consistency across the board with what you're looking to do and what you're looking to achieve, because you'd hate to have a circumstance where you embark on some new practice venture. You potentially look to take on a new location this year or something like that. You give a lot of personal guarantees in order to get that off the mark, and then suddenly you haven't quite given full consideration to your own personal situation, and you might not actually be able to finance that when all things potentially get a bit rocky. So make sure you do have those reviews and those considerations hand in hand. I think exactly what you say, Claire. A lot of people have that set and forget attitude as well with their practice arrangements and their structures and everything else, where they just go, oh yeah, no, we've got the legal and the accounting and all the other advice done when we first started or a few years ago, and it's all completely fine. It was all done properly. And then when you look into it, some of these things haven't been reviewed for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And that time's just gone by in an absolute blip for everyone. And exactly right, so much does change on a very regular basis. I mean, everyone dealt with payroll tax, which we're not going to talk about tonight because Paul and I are still haunted by it. But privacy is the new burning issue in the corner that not many people are aware of and not many people are talking about. And so you've got all these regular changes in legislation, regular changes in case law from a legal perspective that practices need to be mindful of. So we're saying try and review these things at least once a year, but you should hopefully have relationships where you can call people up and go, hey, I heard this has been, a change. Do we need to do anything here? And if it is, then it should be a pretty easy fix where you just look to maybe update some documents and some policies. But if it's a bigger fix, then at least you know about it and you can deal with it before it becomes a problem, particularly because you don't want to have a circumstance where you put off talking to your advisors for years and years and years, and then you find out that 15 documents and arrangements need to be completely changed. That's not only going to annoy you because it's going to hurt the hip pocket, but it's going to annoy all of your staff and the team that you're building within the practice, because they're going to suddenly be expected to get across all these changes, all these new documents as well. So if you're making little changes throughout the year, or little changes every year, it's a lot easier for everyone to keep up with, and for everyone to actually try and stay on top of. So try that as much as you possibly can, and also take the opportunity. I think premises is one that people take as a bit of a set and forget in terms of we've got a lease, it is what it is. But we had a practice recently where a new building was getting built across the road, and they went, oh, that's going to be quite nice. It's going to be a few levels of various things. I wonder if they're planning on putting any commercial spaces in there. Turns out that they were, and that they'd already spoken with a few medical businesses for pathology and otherwise. And they went, well, we should probably try and secure a space there. Otherwise, we're going to be the old business across the road that no one wants to go to, and the new shiny things over here. So try and keep an ear to the ground. They were able to buy the whole premises, rather than just renting. That's also helping to build the wealth. And Paul and I talk about these things regularly with lots of clients in terms of don't just look at a practice as something that you pay rent for and as a big, burden potentially. It is an asset that you're building. So try and make that asset as profitable as humanly possible.
A big
Paul,
thing with, sorry,
Go
Claire.
on, Paul. Go on.
A big thing with buying a building is that people can sometimes get a bit freaked out and say, well, a building's going to cost me $3 or $4 million, $5 million. But the rent that you're paying to a landlord is generally what the landlord is using to pay off the building anyway. And so if the business is financially viable, the practice is financially viable, and you can pay and service your loan, then you're in a situation where the banks will lend you the money. And it does make sense to own your own building in a lot of the cases. It's surprising how aggressive is not the right word, but keen the banks are to support practice owners and doctors into ownership of their own premises. You'll find it much easier to buy your own commercial premises than it can be to buy your own home. The other thing I wanted to talk about on this slide was understanding the internal workings of your practice and really doing a mystery shop from a patient's perspective. In that we've done this in my own accounting practice where we have policies and procedures that we think are all working, but every now and again we'll sit down and have a discussion with our receptionists or our junior accountants and so on and say, well, how do you undertake this task? How do you do this task? And the way that they'll describe it will be sometimes 40% of what we think is actually supposed to be happening. On a good day, it'll be 85%, but it's never 100% of as to what we think is actually happening. And if this isn't happening on a regular basis, if you haven't mystery shopped your practice, then what you think is happening may not be happening. And so the image and the way that you want the practice to be put forward might not be exactly what is happening out there. The other thing that we're doing with a lot of GP and specialist group practices in particular is what has been called the 7-figure reset, where, as Ben was saying a minute ago, when you set up your practice, you're at a different phase of where you are once you might be operating for or trading for 10 years down the track. And the fact that you went to the smartest accountant at that time and they put in place a structure doesn't mean that it was wrong, that was anything that needs to be addressed. But like medical industry, accounting and tax laws do change over time. And as your business has grown, it probably has created quite a bit of value there. And unlocking that value from a tax perspective, unlocking that value from a wealth creation and investment perspective presents a really good opportunity for practice owners to restructure and minimize their tax in a very legal way and give themselves some equity that they might not have had for other investments. So we're doing that a lot with practices as well. But the big thing is you don't know what you don't know. And if you as a practice owner or doctor don't go and ask some questions now and let it go for another 12 months, as Ben was saying, the opportunity will pass you by. And before you know it, you'll be a few years down the track and think, geez, I should have done that. And none of us are getting any younger, and knowing what you can do to improve your own financial situation is quite empowering. That's my little sermon for the afternoon.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Paul. I'm interested in the service and employment and contractor agreements point that we've got here, and what you're actually seeing in the market with that shift to facilities and services agreements and wanting, clinics wanting to protect themselves from that the potential sort of payroll tax. But the way it links back to us is that we see a lot of agreements that are quite punitive on the GPs that join, and for us that means that it's a much harder sell, and that the clinic is potentially doing themselves a disservice in terms of their ability to attract the right kind of doctor. So I'd just be interested in your views, Ben, perhaps on that and what you're seeing and what you think is best practice with regards to that.
Yeah, certainly. I think we were talking about it the other day, Claire, in terms of some visas and various other implications where a lot of practices look to penalize doctors that they may sponsor or that they may try and bring across to the practice if they leave too early. And you do have to be very careful with having those sorts of provisions in there, particularly from a migration perspective. So make sure you do talk to a migration lawyer before you try and set any of those traps. But even just on a general recruitment and incentivizing doctors to actually join a practice, the days of having a service agreement where you guarantee minimum earns for patients, and sorry, for doctors, where you say, doesn't matter what you bill your patients, we're going to make sure that you get paid X dollars per hour. If the practice is dipping into its own pocket to pay the doctors for their work, that's going to cause implications. So if it is a case of you need to have doctors guaranteeing earns and various other things, potentially look at having a contractor agreement instead, where you say, hey, we're going to make sure that you get paid this much per hour. You're going to work these hours for 6 months or 3 months or however long it is that takes to get that person established and make sure that they're really happy. But otherwise, if you're having a service agreement, the way we've seen a lot of practices try and incentivize the doctors to join, but also to try and stay, is a few things, whether it's a sort of service fee that either doesn't charge anything until they reach a threshold or charges a much lower rate until they reach a threshold amount for their billings is one option. But a fairly technical option that requires a lot of talking with people like Paul in order to make sure that you're doing it all properly, all the way through to a few doctors where you go, I can see this person as an absolute asset. I left my last practice because I didn't like the fact that they weren't valuing me. I was doing all of this work. I realized I could potentially make more money if I went out and did it myself. So I want to stop the people that currently engage our practice from doing the same thing and making the same decisions. So, hey, why don't I offer some sort of equity or bonus policy where they get a bit of a contribution based on what they actually contribute to the business. So if I'm generating 40% of the revenue for a practice, I might get a share of the profits once all's said and done, so that I don't get the ideas in my head of going out and starting my own business. You do have to be a bit careful, of course, if you do that, and potentially try and have some special shares or units that you create so that you're not giving away the keys to the castle to someone. Because there has been all sorts of horror stories, which I could go on about for hours, where people give equity or voting powers to people in businesses, and they become little tyrants and throw their weight around and become real pains. So do make sure you document it all properly and have that chat. But there's so many options that you can look to. And Jane, I'm sure you've probably seen millions of things being posed to a lot of people and asked for a lot of things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, the hourly rate is always a big bone of contention and something we need to look at really with every single, contract we're looking at. But really just going back to the slides that we're talking about and just going back to that, regular review, it also ties back into the previous, resolution. We talked about your own personal planning, succession planning, sitting down with your team, individually, and having a conversation around their own plans and where do they want to go? What do they want to do with their careers, with their lives? Are they happy at the practice? Would they like to see some changes? Is there anything else that they might need, want, or appreciate from you? And having a think about maybe who may be a good candidate, maybe for succession, etc. All those conversations, the more regularly they're happening, in the better position you will be, and the happier your staff will be, really. I guess everyone wants to be valued and likes their opinion to be valued. So sitting down and reviewing, contractor agreements regularly, not just, having them roll on indefinitely, because again, from an employment law perspective, even though I am not a lawyer, big disclaimer, the amount of contracts I see that don't actually comply with current regulations is astounding, and I have to go back to practice and say, actually, you need to go and talk to someone professional and get this looked at, because if you get reviewed, if you get assessed, you might get into a world of trouble. So having a reasonable time frame that you do sit down regularly and review these things with your team, your staff, and your professional advisors is something that I would definitely urge you to do. I know it is a bit of a pain point, but just having everything nice and up to date and correct is going to be such a boon, and also just gives you peace of mind, again, which is just one of the most important things in life, I would say. And also going back to the kind of mystery shop perspective, I really like that idea, just in a way mapping out the patient's experience at your practice, because of course everyone gets an induction and everyone gets training when they start, but habits creep in over time, new people start, someone goes away, someone replaces someone. It's good practice to just review that regularly and see what your patients actually see when they come through the door, and and having an assessment of where there might be things that you may be able to tweak, maybe improve, where there might be maybe funnels or pain points that might be improved. And also, one thing that's not on this slide, but I think is quite important, reviewing your IT structure is something that practices don't always do regularly. There's so many advances, in terms of practice software, but also software that helps with, improving billings and maximizing billings in within the framework of the MBS is something that's, it's all out there, and it's something that's worth looking into regularly, because, technology advances so fast. Even after 2 years, you might have something in place. There might be something better out there. So that's all things that are worth doing on a regular basis from my perspective.
Yeah. Do you see lots of, Jane, sort of people asking for the 2-page contracts because they don't like having to read through 40 pages and anything else? And I'm sure you're the same as me, and your heart dies a little bit and you go, well, 2 pages looks great. And I understand that that's probably the key terms, but what's in it for you, doctor, in actually joining this practice? And a proper service employment or contractor agreement really is going to actually outline what's for the benefit of the doctor or the individual as much as what's for the benefit of the practice, and has to be necessarily quite balanced. But yeah, hopefully no one's asking for 80-page contracts, because that'd be awful even I think that.
No, but I mean, there is a solution to that, is to have a separate offer letter that just narrates basically the key points of the offer details, and then having a contractor agreement on the back of that. So you can have a doctor agree to, the basic, position details really, and then going through a more detailed legal contract document. 40 pages is a long contract. If we can, kind of stick to about, 20 pages, doctors are used to that. That's something that people are willing to see. The moment we kind of get over the 30 pages, maybe you can make it a smaller font and reduce it down a little bit. There are ways to tweak it, make the margins a bit wider. But that is something that you can easily implement by just having a separate offer letter with the key points that are to be discussed and agreed. And once those are agreed, then it's more about the legal framework and ramifications, and making sure everyone is covered, you are covered, the doctor is covered. A contract should really benefit both sides equally, and shouldn't really be drawn up with benefiting one side more than the other. It should really be a balanced approach, and that's something that obviously you definitely need some professional advice, and I would always recommend speaking with someone who knows what they're doing about these things.
Yeah, I think I love the idea of having a like almost a reference schedule where you say these are all the key terms that you actually need to worry about, and if you're worried about the general nonsense that people don't like looking at other than weird dweeby lawyers, then put that at the back and say this is the terms and conditions that everyone else has agreed to. We're very comfortable with it. Everyone else is very comfortable with it. There's nothing in there that's going to necessarily hurt you or upset you. It's just outlining the terms and conditions of our use. And if anyone takes too much issue, ask them probably, do you read through the Apple terms and conditions every time before you update your phone as well? Or is it just this specific one? But there's always going to be a few pages at the very least that you're going to have to tackle, but try and use it to your advantage and make sure that it's as fair as possible is a great point.
Okay, thank you. So we might move on to resolution number 3, which really is about implementing improvements and implementing change. And I think the idea of change can be overwhelming. And the rationale behind this resolution number 3 is to try and break that change down and commit to implementing things over a shorter period of time, but one at a time, as opposed to thinking that you have a huge change plan to implement all at once. So, Jane, in terms of your views on the recruitment side of things, what do you think practices could look at in terms of making some small changes, small improvements that would help them in terms of hiring staff, growing their practice?
Look, there's obviously various, angles that you can take here. It could be maybe your premises could do with a little update. It could be that the carpet hasn't been changed in 10 years. Maybe you could do with some new flooring, some better lighting, rather than the old horrible down lights. Maybe you can get some mood lighting going. Or, these are all, cosmetic and can be done slowly, or you can do it as a big project, depending on obviously what you've got available in terms of finance, but also, it is disruptive doing a big project. So doing small things at a time over a weekend, painting a room, putting a new carpet in, are all things that you can do reasonably easily if you break it down. Other things, again, we mentioned the IT before. That tends to be a bit of a bugbear with a lot of doctors. If the IT systems aren't up to date, and if maybe it's not the best software that's available out there, doctors love to hear when a practice is innovative with their IT and using different softwares and different programs to help with any sort of patient tracking, patient admission, booking systems. There are so many things you can do. There are practices where when the patient approaches the practice, the phone automatically pings and says your doctor is running 10 minutes behind, then they can wait in the car park, and then it pings up and says your doctor will be ready to see you in 5 minutes, and they go in. There's so many different technological advances nowadays that you can use to your advantage to make your patient's life easier, your doctor's lives easier, your staff's lives much easier, and that are worth reviewing and taking a look at, because it's a great playing field out there in terms of IT. And I'm not an IT advisor, but some feedback that I get from doctors, they do love it when there is systems in place and practices are quite on the ball with system improvement and staying up to date. That's something that's really quite popular. But it could be really small things. It could be actually regularly checking in with your staff, maybe having a team lunch every few weeks or couple of months even, bringing in some sandwiches and having everyone sit down, block out everyone's schedule and make sure everyone can join. And it could be, it could be just a coffee meeting with your doctors individually once a quarter or something like that, taking them out, blocking them out for a half an hour and going like, hey, are you free? Let's go for a coffee. Want to hear how you're going, how you're finding everything, how's your room, how's the temperature, how are the patient numbers, how is the support staff, how are you finding the rest of the team, how you're getting on with everyone. Just having a conversation with them. And again, you can tie that back to, well, what's working well, what's not working so well. Where do you want to take your career? Are there any other skills that you'd like to develop? Are there some training courses you might want to go to? Having those conversations regularly is so important, because it gives your team and your doctors, especially speaking from a doctor recruitment perspective, really the feeling that you are genuinely interested in them and value their opinion. And that goes so far. And it could be something like a doctor who's always cold could do with maybe a little heater in her room. It could be really small things that are easily fixed. Or a doctor with a bad back might appreciate a standing desk. This was an example I just had yesterday, where a practice said to their doctor, you've got a bad knee, do you want a standing desk? And the doctor was so appreciative that they came to him and said, listen, pick a standing desk that you like, we'll get it for you. And that can be reasonably small changes you can implement reasonably quickly. So having those conversations is so important. And that can really make a difference from a staff retention perspective, and also from a patient experience perspective. If you do that patient journey mapping, if you look at maybe improving some of the journey that the patient is going through at your practice, maybe implementing some of these IT programs. There's so much you can do, and they're quite fun to look at. And yes, there's a cost factor involved, but if that means maybe that your doctors get to bill a bit more at the end of the day, there are ways of making sure that the balance sheet works out in your favor as well.
Thanks, Jane. Paul, what do you see when you sit down with your clients? How do you help them break things down and make it feel manageable in terms of any changes they need to implement?
I've really enjoyed listening to what Jane was saying, but from an accounting point of view, the way that we look at it is to say, you get so many doctors come to us and say, look, my practice is here, but I'd really like it to be, I'd like to have this, I'd like it to be doing this, I'd like it to be doing that, and so on. And I think Jane hit it on the head when she was talking about the communication and constantly having conversations with people. What we do with a lot of our practices in this situation is to go through and say we really should have a strategy as to how you're going to implement these changes and why. And part of that is understanding your vision for what the practice is, because if your vision is in your head and nobody knows what it is, they don't know where you're going. And so people can be pulling in all different directions, thinking that they're doing what you want them to do, but they're not actually achieving what you want to do. And you'll get frustrated, but you're busy doing your doctoring work and seeing patients, and you've got the people outside doing what they think they want you to do, and the communication isn't there. So it's communicating that vision, then it's going through and working out a plan as to implement it. And Jane mentioned before, going through and starting the conversation with doctors. The actual conversation isn't the thing. It's the starting the process of scheduling the conversation and then going through and following that through. And if you achieve that as your first monthly task, where you continually every 2 months sat down with the doctors to say, let's have a checkup or a check-in as to how you're going. I think that would be great for doctors and practices, and really lifting the morale and talking to our reception staff and getting feedback from them. I always tell the story about how practice managers, we had a session where we're talking about change, and the PMs were saying, you know, the doctors think they talk to everybody, but they only talk to their receptionist in particular, or 2 of their particular favourites within the practice. And all the other staff could see this happening, and they didn't like it, and they felt left out, not included. But you bring it to the doctor's attention, and then suddenly the doctors do wander around and say hello to everybody, and it lifted the whole mood of the place. So there's these little things you do, but having a plan behind it and then articulating that vision of what you're trying to implement. Because if you do a whole lot of random things, that's nice and it's good. But if there's a plan behind it about going from where you are now to where you want to be, and then having these changes that go through, that to me gives you a lot more structure. And then behind it, you'll see the morale of your staff lift. You'll see the morale of your doctors lift. Happier doctors will hopefully bill more. Staff will stay and treat the patients better. Patients will have a better experience. You get better Google reviews, which then leads to more doctors saying, well, I want to go work there. And so more profits come in, the value goes up, and it's a win-win. And that's, to me, from an accounting point of view, what we want to have. And it's great to go to somewhere and work where you're happy and also making good coin.
Quite right. And the whole plan, if a
And now
practice
Ben's going to
has
say
no,
we need a legal agreement for it,
has
Claire.
no
So
idea.
that's what he's going to say.
Yeah,
Debbie
but the whole
Downer
plan,
over here,
if you have no idea where to start, I presume they come to somebody like yourself, Paul, and somebody like Ben. I mean, if somebody really is sitting there thinking, I need to change, I need my approach to my clinic to change, you know, where do they start?
I think you've got the check-in. So I think Ben and I are having conversations with people that want to reach out to us all the time. We don't charge for the initial consultation. It's about just sharing the knowledge. And that's why we've got a good reputation for helping people, because it's not always a fee for service thing. There's so many people that reach out and talk to me at conferences or just ring us up and say, hey, I've got an idea, and what do you think about this, and getting a second opinion and go from there. There is that structured strategic plan we can do. There is just a quick download we can do. There's lots of ways that we can help, but the starting point is to pick up the phone or send an email and make contact to say, well, hey, I'd like this looked at. I just need a second opinion. And it might be that everything is fine. Great. We won't manufacture issues. But if there are issues, then we can identify them. Then it's up to you to decide what you want to do from there.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
I think a lot of people kind of go, I won't talk to people like Paul and myself because it's going to cost me an arm and a leg. But I mean, speaking for both of us, we'll usually try and give people the answer if we can within that sort of 20 or 30 minutes, because we usually do know the answer as much as we can, or point you in the right direction to say, hey, you know, really great that all of your team are coming to you, all the doctors are coming to you saying, hey, you know, we've heard about Insert AI product and we really want to trial this into practice. And certainly a lot of practice managers are coming to us saying, I'm really worried about this. There's so much that I don't know about it. There's so much from a privacy perspective we don't know. The practice owners either don't want to know about it or they're equally excited. And I'm trying to figure out how I manage these expectations, because there's so much. And yes, it can aid all the practices and bring so much to the table, but I don't know what I don't know. And, you know, how much consent do I need to be getting? How far do I need to go to make sure we're ticking all these boxes? And, potentially it's often the case of, well, make sure your patient registration form's up to date and covers off that you're going to use AI. Make sure that you're in the consult, save the patient before you hit record or press start. Hey, just confirming that you're happy for this, and put it in the note. And the benefit of the AI is that it'll usually put it in the note of, John said to Sally that they were happy for the AI to be in place, and you've got that consent recorded. And so making sure you actually understand as well what it is and where it is and how efficient it actually is going to be. But it's things like that where it's little things that feel very overwhelming for a lot of the practice owners and practice managers that we talk to, because there's so much information out there. I think one thing people often underestimate is how much research doctors seem to do of their own volition into things, and how much they want to improve their own practice and expedite it, because they also know, hey, me being 2 hours behind schedule and having patients waiting all this time isn't a great look, and my patients might go somewhere else. So they want to find ways to be more efficient. They want to find ways to try and minimize that patient distress. So working with the doctors, I think we've all spoken about it in terms of try and consult with them as much as you can, but also, have the conversation with your admin team and your practice staff in terms of, okay, if any of the doctors ever come to you with a complaint, or if they're just whinging a little bit about something, always come to me, always let me know what they're going on about, and any little gripe that they have. Because if a doctor's having a little gripe, as you say, about my room's too cold, there's an easy fix to that, and that's going to make them a lot happier. And ultimately, I haven't ever met a practice that says, "Oh, we've got too many doctors. We're going to try and get rid of them, so we're going to freeze a couple out of their room by making it so cold for them." It's always, how do we get more people to join? How do we try and keep them? And how do we make sure that they continue to work and see the vision, as Paul was saying, in terms of where the practice is trying to go? And once you do have that conversation, if it is a case of, in 1 month you say to them, look, plan for the next few years is for us to potentially take on other sites and, take on further growth opportunities, or to maybe we look at expanding the practice offering and bringing in some dietitians or some other specialists. The doctors and the other staff might actually know people and say, oh, well, actually I went through uni with X and they're now doing that specialty, so they'd be a great fit, and bolt them in that way. Sharing that vision allows everyone to kind of understand where the practice is going, but also, to a large extent, understand, well, hey, if we bolt in all these other specialists and specialties and various other things, the practice is probably going to have more money coming into it to make it a nicer building and a nicer place to work. And so, at the end of the day, coming back to that point of making sure the premises is nice and has all of the necessities for keeping people as happy as possible. It does seem quite trivial, but it does make a massive difference to retention and to making sure you're keeping everyone as comfortable as possible. So do take the time to just think about those little things. And yes, as Paul said, make sure you document all of these things. I think a lot of people that we talk to tend to put off talking to their advisors because they go, this is going to cost me so much. I've got to update privacy forms, contracts, other arrangements, and various other things. And so they put it off. But have that conversation with your advisor, with your lawyer, with your accountant, and say, okay, well, I know I need to address 20,000 things in the practice. I don't have all the time and all the money in the world. Let's pick the top 6 that we need to deal with this year. What's the most pressing of those 6? And let's stagger the work that we're going to do over the course of 6 or 12 months so that the cash flows impact is minimized as much as possible. You're staggering that work, not only from a financial perspective, but also from the practice perspective. As I said earlier, no doctor wants to receive 4 new documents that they have to then read and get across and sign when they go, I don't understand why we can't just maintain the existing arrangements. Do stagger it and make sure you pace it out so that you're not annoying everyone. Potentially let them know, guys, we're going to have, a few arrangements and a few agreements come through over the next few months that we're changing, but we want to make sure that we're not taking up too much of your personal time reading through these things. So we're going to stagger it a little bit. If you want to go quicker, great, let us know. Otherwise, we're going to do ABC. And just being open with that communication and with not only your internals, but your external advisors makes a massive difference.
I think just to pick up on one of Ben's points there, people do make the assumption that because we're bigger organizations that it's going to be very, very expensive. Normally it's the case with lawyers, but with the accountants, and with Ben's, with Avant Legal as well, because we do this an awful lot, we have got processes in place, we have got procedures and people that can deliver very cost effectively. And I think the last 4 or 5 GP practice groups we've picked up, we've actually cut their fees. One group, we actually cut their fees by 2/3, because the firm they were with just didn't understand the industry and wasn't even able to add value. And even the job to complete their compliance work was so expensive. And because we can follow a process and we know what we're doing, we actually do deliver it a lot cheaper, which means there's more time there to provide that advisory work. And we've got the templates, we've got the processes in place already. So
I think that's a good point to make, Paul, in terms of whether it's financial advice, accounting, legal, or recruitment, is go to the people that play in this space all the time and know it really well. Because if you don't, you could be getting the wrong advice that will be much more costly in the long run.
and you end up teaching them.
Yeah. And we certainly see it from a recruitment perspective as well, is that there are plenty of recruitment agencies in the market, but they don't necessarily know the general practice space. They don't understand it particularly well. So so it is about, not just considering the cost of fees associated with this advice, but it's also the value that you get from it as well by going to the true experts. We're coming to the end of our webinar. Can you believe it? We've just had so much fun. It's gone so fast. On the slide here, you'll see a QR code which takes you to a landing page where you can leave feedback about this webinar. Let us know perhaps what you'd like to know more about. I think this has been very sort of high level, talking broadly about how to approach the year, but if there are certain things that you think you'd like more detail on, then we can either do that in the form of a webinar, or you can actually reach out directly to each of our experts here today, who are very happy to have an initial free consultation with you to truly understand what it is you need and tailor something specific to you. Now, we did actually have some time for Q&A, but I don't believe we've had any questions yet, unless somebody wants to rapidly type any questions now in the Q&A section. Paul, Ben, Jane, any last comments from you and things that perhaps you think are on the minds of the clinic owners that you're talking to currently about the year ahead?
My thinking is pretty much what I always say at this time of year. If you take the opportunity, you need to take the opportunity to reach out, contact us, use the QR code, ask some questions, get a free second opinion. You have absolutely nothing to lose, and everything to gain.
Yeah, I think, I've never spoken with a practice who's reached out or that's got in touch with myself or anyone in the team here who hasn't had something that they can potentially either do better or that can make their life easier. There's always going to be little things, and because we do see everything under the sun, there's going to be aspects where we can say, have you thought about potentially a restructure like Paul was talking about earlier, in terms of, hey, you've got insert old school style entity where you've also got all this personal debt tied up over here. Have thought about a bit of a restructure, try and get advantage of good debts and bad debts, Paul, and try and take advantage of that so that you can make your personal life a bit happier as well as your professional life a lot happier. There's always going to be something, and try and take advantage of as much as you can. And if it's a little thing that you can update really quickly and really easily, fantastic. And if it's a big thing that's going to take a year or two to get through, better to find out about it sooner rather than later, certainly.
Okay, thank you. And Jane?
If there's just one thing you take out of it today from my perspective, is talk to your staff, talk to your doctors, talk to your nurses, check in with them, make them feel valued, see how they're feeling, how they're doing, what their plans are, if they have ideas for any sort of improvement to whatever it may be, the practice, the setup, the patient flow, whatever it may be. those are really small things you can do to make everyone feel valued, and you know, just having a cup of coffee goes such a long way in that regard. So that is, you know, if you take one thing out of it today, that would be it from me.
Okay, thank you. So if you have any questions that you'd rather not publish in this forum, then again, you can actually raise that question using the QR code. But otherwise, I'd like to say thank you very much to Ben, Paul and Jane for joining us and giving us their views on how to set yourself up for success for the year ahead. And we will be looking potentially to do some other another series of topics throughout the year. So again, if you have any ideas of things that you'd like us to focus on, please leave that on the landing page with the QR code. But for now, thanks very much for joining us, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.